At the beginning of 2022, we got the final issue of The Last Ronin, and then it was recently announced that The Last Ronin will be getting a sequel of sorts and be called The Last Ronin Lost Years, and we're currently going through that story arc right now, and I must admit, it is pretty good. And recently, Kevin Eastman came out and spoke about the future for this universe, and it was actually announced that The Last Ronin will be getting a new sequel, and it's pretty interesting. Okay, so coming over to comicbook.com, where the article was first announced, and again, it's pretty interesting with the things that I had to say about this whole universe, I would say. So as you can see here, we do get the big title saying that Last Ronin will begin another sequel and stuff like that. So this whole thing shouldn't really come as a surprise, really. And as the article does state in the first sentence, it shouldn't come as a surprise to all tmnt fans, as a proper sequel to the popular Last Ronin comic has been announced. tmnt co-creator and Last Ronin co-writer Kevin Eastman confirmed the news in a new interview, teasing details about the current prequel sequel series and revealing a full part 2 is on the way. Now I must admit, this is somewhat interesting, I would say, with the whole part 2 stuff. Now I do find the part 2 title to be somewhat interesting in certain aspects, and something which I will explain a little bit further, but with the way that they're promoting the Lost Years, it does feel a bit weird that they're going to be tossing it part 2 for The Last Ronin and something like that when they are saying that the Lost Years is a sequel and prequel, so I'm somewhat confused by it, but I will explain a bit more in terms of some stuff which I'm a bit more confused by in a minute. Speaking of Rolling Stone, the comic artist teased that while work continues on the Lost Years spin-off title, the sequel to The Last Ronin will arrive after it's concluded. Further details on The Last Ronin 2 will be confirmed later. So again, this is somewhat really interesting, I would say, as again, I feel as though that Lost Years, with the way that they're promoting it, and even here they do say that it's a sequel of sorts, so I'm somewhat confused by all that. So will The Last Ronin Part 2 be the official sequel, or would it be the third one? So I'm somewhat confused by all that, but somewhat interesting, I would say. Okay, so reading a bit more further into this article, Kevin Eastman does go on to say that the Lost Years will run 5 issues, with a one shot called Lost Day, which is a 5-part issue thing, which will lead into Last Ronin 2, which we got some really awesome ideas for that. So overall, with this little bit here, I must admit, this does really excite me to know that all this stuff I are reading in the Lost Years will have something to do and be really important for part 2 of The Last Ronin. But again, with the part 2 thing, the one thing which I'm still concerned about so far, or not really concerned but somewhat questioning it, is the fact that they're still tossing it The Last Ronin, even though Mikey's dead and the whole Ronin thing is not actually going to be matter anymore. So I'm somewhat confused by that, but with all the turtle stuff, I'm really interested to see how they're going to have a big play part in The Last Ronin Part 2, because they are somewhat the more interesting parts about the Lost Years so far. The scribe went on to talk about the new group of tmnt that has been introduced into the franchise, and similarly to be a big part of the sequel. The evolution of the new characters, new turtles, it was the same heart and soul. It would be easy to say, oh, here's more turtles, and we're named after 4 scientists. The story and how you're introduced to them, and as you see them grow, and what they're going to be in the Lost Years. You're seeing the tip of the iceberg, but thinking out, if you will, of what you're going to do with them. So I must admit, overall, this is really interesting with some of this stuff that I do mention here. Just because the first thing which I'd like to talk about is the fact that Kevin Eastman says that they are named after 4 scientists, which is really interesting because as of right now we know that the names are mean one in different languages, so that was already interesting. But the fact that he says that they're named after 4 scientists, I'm not too sure if any scientists are actually named one in the world. So if that is the case, then that could be interesting, and maybe this could be leading on to the turtles getting new names or something like that. This is something really interesting, I must say. I must admit, some of the stuff he does say here, we're talking about the new turtles, and he does say that all the interesting stuff will be happening in part 2 of Lost Ronin, and we're just seeing them get developed here. This is really exciting me, as I can't wait to see what we're going to be doing with these characters. So then Kevin Eastman goes on to say that just introducing the pages of the tmnt for Last Ronin Lost Years, the 4 new turtles include Odin, seems kind of dumb but in a charming way, and looks like a snapping turtle. Next, Uno, an athletic smarty pants who is observant to a fault and also eager to one-up his siblings. Then Moja, short and stocky with a pointed beak, she's protective but also eager to please. Finally Yi, the sensitive one with an interest in technology. The colour on her skin makes it appear as though she's already wearing one trademark tmnt ninja mask. So yeah, there's not really too much to really say here about these new turtles than what I've already said in past videos, and I must admit I'm really looking forward to see what they do with these characters, as it feels though there's a lot of potential with these characters to do so many great things. And with this whole article basically saying that this whole universe is going somewhere and these characters are going to be really important and going to be doing stuff really interesting, it really gets me excited. And then for the final bit on this article, it goes, as readers may recall, the world of The Last Ronin is a dark one, with more aligned tonally with The Dark Knight's Return than a traditional tmnt story. It's unclear what the plot for the actual sequel will be, and whether it's focused on the original Turtles or the new ones exclusively, but fans should expect more news on it later this year. Okay, so yeah, with this bit here, I do want to bring up some really interesting points which I do have a few questions about for this potential sequel. Okay, so one is, would this be a limited series or would this be an ongoing series? Just because so far with these two series, The Last Ronin and The Lost Years, they've both been 5-issue miniseries. And it's not really to say that that's bad, but I do think there's a little downsides to it, as you don't really get to connect with these characters too much. So I do think that going into this, I would like to know in advance whether I should be really excited to get really developed characters and stories, or just be grateful that I'm getting this tell story. But I do think that because it'll be part 2 of The Last Ronin, I do think it'll probably be another 5-issue miniseries, hopefully some more one-shots and stuff like that to really expand upon this universe. And if anything, I wouldn't be too surprised if this whole universe just get a few more parts and stuff like that, as it feels though there's a lot really interesting things they could tell. And yeah, they're talking about if it's going to be focusing on the new Turtles or the old Turtles. I think it could be a bit of both really. Just because it feels though that the whole Last Ronin universe is not really ready to say goodbye to the old Turtles just yet, and if anything they do want to keep on to them as much as they can. And I wouldn't be too surprised if maybe we do have some more flashbacks to when Turtles were sorting out stuff with Shredder in the past and stuff like that, as well as though there's so much in this universe which we don't really know about just yet, and I wouldn't be too surprised if we do get told about in part 2, part 3 or something like that. So there is so much potential here, and yeah, it's all one of those ones which I'm sort of curious to see now, and wouldn't be too surprised if maybe the Turtles could be looking at these old Turtles and being like, oh yeah, I want to follow in these footsteps or something like that. So I do find it really interesting in terms of what could potentially be and what could not potentially be. It's a really interesting thing. And I must admit, with how uncertain things are right now in terms of what things could be happening and what might not be happening, and with the actual story of The Lost Years being uncertain just yet in terms of how it's going to end, is a really interesting and fun time to be a Turtle fan, I'd say. So yeah, I must admit, I'm really looking forward to The Last Ronin Part 2. Let me know in the comment section below what you think about this news. Are you looking forward to it? Are you not? And what do you think is going to happen in the sequel? As again, there could be so much that could happen, and again, so much that could not happen. But yeah, that's going to be it for today, guys. If you do awesome, please share, like, subscribe, and all that stuff. Goodbye, yo, bye.